Hello and welcome to another edition of the Supernatural Side Salad Show. So this is the first episode of season 5 after a short break last month. So I think we're probably going to start with discussing some of the topics that came up in the last Magic Sandwich show. The main one was the referendum in Ireland over gay marriage. I take it you support gay marriage.
Was that directed to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's not. I'm really more concerned with the idea of the government getting involved with it at all. It seems like a step backwards to keep asking the government for permission. I think I would like to see the larger issue addressed, and just have them out of it out of it entirely. But definitely, if straight people have the right to get legally married, then definitely gay people need to have that right too. I'm totally supportive of that.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So the counter argument is that people would argue that gay marriage is a religious tradition, and we have freedom of religion in Ireland, but it need not be Ireland. It could be any well-developed Western country. So the argument could be that since it's a religious tradition and we have freedom of religion.
Marriage in there's two things. There's the tradition of marriage, and then there's the legal marriage. And I think what people are campaigning for is the legal right to have all the rights and benefits and that are afforded to straight couples be afforded to them. So again, it's really
not just
Go ahead.
Sorry, go on. I was going to say it's not just a religious tradition, is it? It's a human tradition. We've all been partaking in this tradition for centuries, atheist or otherwise.
So
I don't think the church can claim ownership of marriage, the tradition of marriage.
I'm not informed enough on the subject to say one way or another. It was my understanding that the traditional marriage that we think of as this is why they constantly refer to it as their own. I'm just sort of accepting on face value that that's true. I could be wrong, but yeah, the one woman wed in holy union before God, and all that stuff. I'm an atheist, obviously, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But it was my understanding that it was a pretty explicitly religious tradition. I could have been completely wrong.
Its origins may be rooted in religion, but I don't think that takes away from the fact that it's a tradition exercised by people, whether they be religious or not. Historically, it may have been seeded from religion, but in today's culture, it is a tradition of mankind. It's not just something that religious people do.
I mean, what would people say about the argument that instead of secularizing the institution of marriage, we instead remove the legal endowment that marriage brings, and have everyone that wants to get married in the legal sense having civil partnerships, and keep marriage as purely this sort of religious tradition that carries no legal weight, and everyone, regardless of their orientation or whatever, should have civil partnerships.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, my parents are kind of religious, and they're sort of cafeteria Christians, non-denominational. And I had this same discussion with my dad, and he was like, "Well, why do they have to call it marriage?" I'm like, "Well, what do you want them to call it? Like marriage 2.0 or schmarriage, or like what difference does it make?" I think they're definitely losing ground when you hear religious people talk about it, and they eventually concede that society is evolving much quicker than them, and everybody else is okay with it, and they feel like the outcasts because they're not, so they start conceding and making all these concessions. Go, all right, well, just don't call it marriage, or don't have this. They can have the same rights, and I don't personally get lost in the details. I just want people to have equality under the law. I don't really care what they call it, and if it has to happen in a church, or if a church refuses to let it happen in a church, or I don't really care. I just want them to have the same rights. So.
There's an interesting point here. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if marriage was something which was only recognised by the church, then it wouldn't be an issue, because I believe religions can have their freedom to exercise their traditions, you know, so long as they're not physically or mentally harming other people. But the problem is that it's recognised by the government as well, and certain benefits actually come with that.
Right. And sometimes, as somebody who has no intentions of ever getting married, when I talk to my married friends, sometimes some of those benefits are poorly understood or greatly exaggerated. But there's definitely, I'm saying all the benefits and rights that come with marriage are not necessarily exclusive to marriage. I think a lot of those can be achieved by a good accountant or a good lawyer or power of attorney documents or whatever. But the fact remains that, yeah, there's definitely some it's a legally recognized, it's a legally binding contract for sure, and that has nothing to do with the church, and that it's recognized by the state is part of the problem. I agree, and that they need to have that equally recognized.
Well, an interesting extension of this is that we acknowledge here that I think all of us agree that marriage is primarily a legal endowment, rather than, I mean, a religious person would say something very different, but an interesting extension to this is that since marriage comes with these sets of financial privileges, there's no reason why you couldn't, for example, marry your brother, not in any romantic sense, but for simply the reason that you'd want to endow them with these legal privileges. So you could marry an individual that you haven't, that is not your partner, you have no romantic attraction, but because of the convenience of, you know, the default, you know, for example, in your will, the money would by default be left to your brother. I don't really see any issue with doing something like that, other than, of course, it might make it bureaucratically more complicated. But would you be in favour of being able to marry basically anyone, just for the sort of financial thing, and basically completely separating marriage from even there being a romantic component at all?
I mean, in that sense, I'm looking at, when you're talking about purely, do I think a person and their brother should be able to get the rights, if they want to enter into a contract that allows them to have something like power of attorney at the end of their life, then I don't see why not. Now, if we take the sum total of all those rights and benefits and everything but the profession of love on an altar and just call it marriage, then it's one more reason why I don't really see the need for the state to even get involved and call it marriage. But as far as the rights go, I guess if two people wanted to have an unromantic marriage, I guess logically, unless I'm missing something, I would have to follow that I would afford them that same right if two consenting adults wanted to do that, right?
Ah, yeah, sorry, my microphone just cut out. So I mean, the interesting thing is that I mean, juggling these concepts here, I don't see anything wrong with. Okay, so I am talking in a romantic sense now with bigamous relation, not bigamous. Is that the right word? Sorry, polygamous. That's it. Polygamous relationship. So, for instance, a romantic relationship between more than two people. And in the UK, you can't get married to more than one person, because that would be considered bigamy, and I can see the reasons for this. I guess you could sort of game the system to get financial advantages out of marrying more than one person, but in a romantic sense, there isn't all that much wrong with it. So my issue here is that there's no clear separation between sort of having a romantic relationship and formalising that, or maybe the religious tradition, and the sort of legal endowments that come with marriage, which I guess could be called a civil partnership. So to me, that there's no sort of, I mean, if we are to modernise the system, maybe we should make it clearer what you know, you could could get a civil partnership with anyone, any consenting adult, just for all these legal endowments. Or you could get married to someone in a romantic sense, which would confer perhaps slightly different. I don't know. I don't really know why it would confer anything different legally, but it might be quite interesting to have a society where this distinction exists.
Yeah, I do agree that I guess anybody could apply to the law for the same protections, and well, why not? Why not polygamy? Why not more than two? It's just all the more reason why I'm extremely apprehensive about letting the government define the term marriage in the first place and just let it be. If a group of people want to get together and decide they want to have the benefit of power of attorney over each other at the end of their life, then I don't see why not. And then, like you said, when there's tax incentives involved, when there's benefits and breaks, there's creates perverse incentives to gain the system, and it's not fair. For one, it's not fair to single people. I don't want to have to subsidize that or pay for that, or I'm missing out or being taxed more. It does. It's just why I'm just really apprehensive. In that regard, I wouldn't classify myself as a full libertarian, but in that regard, I'm very skeptical about letting the government get involved at all in relationships at all.
Okay. So
I think the whole thing's falling by the wayside anyways. I think if it wasn't for the incentives, a lot of people wouldn't get married. I think there's a bit of societal pressure, as you sort of expected, but even that sort of falling by the wayside. It seems like with the fall of religion here in the West, there seems to be some kind of correlation with the fall of marriage rates. I don't know about in the UK, but definitely in America, less people are getting married, and those that do get married are getting married later often in life. So
in the UK, 50% of people get divorced, and given that statistic, I would say that there's a massive disadvantage of getting married because of the divorce settlements. And I imagine that if you don't get married, you have an advantage that the settlements are probably easier to negotiate, whereas divorce settlements can be a real bureaucratic hassle. So
here in America, the family courts, if there's kids involved, definitely, but even without child support, alimony, there's some nightmarish marriage stories here. That was one of the things that stood out to me when I visited my friends in Sweden. They seem to have a very advanced sort of understanding of couples, and just when they dissolve their partnership, they just go their separate ways. There's not the sort of bickering and bitter sort of petty fighting that you get with the divorce courts, once again, because divorce courts, there's an incentive to divorcing. There's a financial incentive, so then that creates all sort of perverse incentives to slander your partner or make false claims after the fact, or just try to make them look like a generally bad person in the eyes of some family court. And that's why I don't like the idea of the government getting involved in it, because now you've got all these sort of perverse incentives to break up, and if you do break up, not necessarily for the right reasons, it's frightening. It's enough to make a guy like me in my late 20s just wash his hands of the whole thing and say, I've worked too hard to get where I am, I don't intend to get married. So
if we're sort of done with that little discussion, I'm not. Did you want to add anything, Dylan, to that? Be a bit quiet, or?
No, I guess I'll just close it off by saying that once you start raising these kinds of questions, like should we separate out financial marriage from romantic marriage, you quickly start to find the limitations in the cultural and traditional definitions that we have of marriage, and it kind of for me at least tends to make me think that it'd be easier just to do away with the idea altogether.
Yes, that's an interesting idea, to just not have any financial advantages, or no. I mean, that's interesting. I don't really know what the implications of that would be, so I haven't really considered it, to be honest. So that's quite an interesting idea.
Well, I mean, people would be free to write up their own legally binding contracts on a case-by-case basis,
right.
And then there's no need to have your relationship recognised in the eyes of the law, or if there's no financial benefit to it, then that solves that problem as well.
I guess.
I agree with that, but I do think there is the one thing that hangs me up on that is if there is kids involved, how do you sort of deal with that? How do you deal with who pays what and make sure, because you're going to get couples fighting over the kid. If two people go their separate ways that don't have kids, well, it's like, well, whatever. But when there's kids involved, it's like how do you deal with that without getting a court involved?
Yeah, that already happens. I mean, people have kids without getting married. I'm not sure the idea of marriage. Maybe I'm not understanding where you're coming from, but I wouldn't think the idea of marriage would assist in that in any way.
Probably right. I probably just haven't looked into it too much.
Well, I mean, we can continue with this a bit. The other topic that I thought was interesting, it was one that wasn't mentioned in the Magic Sandwich show, if I'm correct, and which is a shame really, because I think it's a really interesting topic. And Patrick Stewart described this as something like deliciously representative of the moral issue. And it was again, it was in Ireland, I think, and it was, I'm not sure if you've heard of this. It was a gay couple that went into a bakery and wanted to buy a cake that said that I think it had, the cake had a message of support for gay marriage or something along those lines. It was some message of some description about a homosexual relationship or whatever. And the bakery was religious in nature, and it was against their religious beliefs to bake that cake. And so the couple went to court and actually won and managed to sue the bakery. And I think this is quite an interesting debate, really. Who was in the right? Was the bakery in the right? Should the bakery be allowed to refuse to bake cake with writing on that they disagree with, or should the couple be allowed to have the cake being baked on account of discrimination laws? And I think this is a delight. And Patrick Stewart made this case better than I did. But I think this is a delightful example because it's so grey. I mean, sometimes you get cases where you can easily go one way or the other, but I think this is quite hard to say whose rights exactly are being violated here. So I'm interested to know what you think.
Dylan, what do you think?
Okay. When this subject first came up, I really had not had any developed thoughts on the matter. So I've only been thinking about this for the past couple of weeks. But I'll lay out my thoughts and see what you guys think. I'm going to argue that the bakery should have the right not to bake the cake, not because I recognise their religion. I couldn't care twice for their religious beliefs, but if on the grounds that if a outlet, retail outlet or bakery or whatever, wants to discriminate potential customers, they can go ahead and do that, and they can see for themselves in the free market how it will affect their business. I'm happy for them to go down that path. I think the businesses which come out on top and survive through, call it natural selection, will be the ones which are more in line with the thinking of our Western culture. Now, there are limitations to this line of reasoning, obviously. We do need to protect certain classes, or we do need to protect classes in general at certain points. We can't say, okay, this massive supermarket chain has permission to not serve gays. Okay, that suddenly means that theoretically gays would not have any way to access food, right? Theoretically, anyone could deny them. Everyone could deny them. They would. We can't allow that to happen. It'd just be wrong. So my thinking is the line is drawn when we're talking about luxury items which are non-essential for your peace of mind, for your everyday living, non-essential for your life, basically. So that's kind of where my thoughts are at the moment.
I mean, this is a slight distraction. That you're going with the sort of free market libertarian argument, which I think is quite interesting. But you could make the case that massive supermarket chains shouldn't exist in a true free market anyway, because they're monopolising, so they're removing the competition of small businesses. So I think that's quite an interesting distraction, but I won't dwell too much on that. And I do sympathise with that argument that you just made. I think it's reasonable, and I think it is difficult to know where to draw the line. Now with the free market thing, I think the issue in general is that when you have a society that in general is tolerant of something like homosexuality, which I think a modern Western civilization is, what Western society is, the free market argument holds very well, because the vast majority of people are tolerant. So a business that is homophobic is going to lose out. However, if the entire society at large is intolerant, then that's where the difficulty lies, because the free market argument doesn't necessarily hold there, because everyone has these intolerant belief systems. You know, you could imagine
that's why I draw the line at luxury items.
Yeah. I mean, my first thought is definitely with the cake as it's an interesting distinction between the luxury and non-luxury items. I hadn't thought of it that way, but definitely with something like cake, my first response is also the libertarian argument. If they want to be assholes, let something like Reddit or somebody get a hold of their reviews and go to Yelp or something like that. We've all seen companies make poor decisions before and get absolutely flooded with bad business reviews, and they sort of suffer in the free market, as it were. Even I'm not sure if that's genuinely free market, because in that case, people aren't actually patronizing that company and then saying they were unsatisfied with that patronage. They were just saying, well, fuck these guys, they're a bunch of racists or homophobes or whatever, so we're just going to flame their accounts. But definitely with something like the cake, yeah, my thought is to not force them to make a cake, because then I'd just be afraid they'd spit in it. I mean, as the person of color, I had this talk with my sister, who is pretty liberal, and I don't want to force anybody to do anything, because that has bad ramifications too. And my first thought is that they would be missing out. Same thing with a company or hiring practices. If I'm qualified and they're passing me up based on the fact they don't like the look of me or that I look like an uppity or whatever, then it's like, well, you're going to miss out on talent, and then I'm going to go to your competition. But certainly with the cake, I agree that you shouldn't be forcing them to make a cake. Although I did think that's what they ended up doing, didn't they?
It was actually resolved. I think I'm not sure if they were forced to make the cake, but the bakery was sued, so the court ruled in favour of the couple. I mean,
I don't know. My sister, she tried to make the case, and she was like, well, we already had this with like colored fountains and colored sections of restaurants who wouldn't serve us, and it's like, well, the government sort of instituted slavery in the first place, and they sort of helped stoke the fires of distrust and racism between the races, whatever that means, because they instituted it in the first place. They codified in the law that we weren't humans, and then 3/5 of humans, rather, and then people started to accept that. And I'm not sure if that sort of distrust would have gone on as long without being subsidized by the state. And I've said many times, much to the chagrin of people like my parents, that slavery isn't a very profitable venture. When you're trying to force people to work against their will, it's just generally they're not motivated to be there. And I'm not saying that the country wasn't built on the backs of slaves. In some regards it was. I'm just saying that happy workers tend to be the most productive workers, and that without being subsidized by the state, catching slaves running off plantations, local police forces, regional, whatever, that it wouldn't have been as profitable in the free market. And that argument gets compared to sort of slave manufacturing.
The issue is, the issue is that I would like to believe that today that the free market is a very powerful force for good, and I think that in most cases, but it is possible. It is possible that people's bigoted attitudes can sometimes be more powerful than the free market, which it's annoying, because I think the free market is a really fantastic thing, but if we were to transport back to the 1950s, and where racist attitudes, and perhaps in America in the South, did exist, I think you could probably get away with businesses having these being discriminatory, but not being punished by the free market like you would expect, because everyone's doing it. And if everyone's doing it, then you've still essentially got a free market.
Yeah, that's why I stop short of a wholesale endorsement of the free market argument all the time. I could definitely envision a time, or at least a place, where just a town, I might stop on the side of some road and be in a town that just generally doesn't like black people. And then I'd be like, oh shit, I'm screwed, like if I can't get gas or something like that. And it's like, well, what would I do? So that's why I stopped short of a wholesale endorsement of it.
It's difficult. Perhaps there can be a compromise. Perhaps have minimalist discrimination laws. I think there's still possibly some merit to be had with discrimination laws, but keep them minimalist, and try and let the free market do the heavy lifting.
So my parents live in a town in rural Wisconsin. It's like 40 miles west of where I live, and it's beautiful. It's Lake Country, Wisconsin. It's a beautiful place, but they are like the only black couple on the lake, and every time I go out there, I get blatantly racist comments. Like, not going to say them here, but just bad things that you wouldn't expect to be said in 2015, but it's a rural area in the Midwest. So, I mean, but when I think of a place like that, I have no doubt that if there wasn't a law forcing these people to treat me decent, then they wouldn't. Any one of those people that I meet at the bar that just don't like me, just at first glance, could be the person pumping my gas and say, nope, you're not getting gas. Or no, like, it's just like, if those people were allowed to run free, it's like, but at the same time, I don't want to. It's like you said, it's a slippery slope. It's a really gray area. So I don't know the answer.
You know, I mean, I think it's a really interesting area because the libertarian argument I do sympathise with. Although, of course, in America, the libertarian argument seems to mean something akin to anarchy, which to me seems pretty stupid. I think anarchy is a really stupid idea. But at the same time, it only works if the vast majority of people have sensible beliefs. I mean, you could even apply this to something like freedom of speech, which is, I mean, obviously, I'm extremely in favour of freedom of speech. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't. But you could apply the same argument to freedom of speech. You could argue that if 90% of the population wants to introduce a law to, I don't know, treat black people as second-class citizens, for example, and 90% of people had those views, and you wanted to argue for freedom of speech that 90% of people should be allowed to have those views, yet at the same time, when 90% of people have those views, you're probably going to get a law that makes this belief a reality. Whereas, on the other hand, when you have a culture where 90% of people believe the antithesis of this, and that people should be treated equally regardless of their skin colour, it doesn't matter if 10% of people have stupid beliefs. So
I think there's a way around it, though, in the sense that all of this is contingent on the assumption that people can see us. I guess in the case of the gay bakery, they knew it was two dudes' names and they knew it was supporting gay marriage. But in the case of, let's say, buying common goods, I can go to somewhere like Amazon that doesn't have to see my face. They don't know. I can remain anonymous and still receive goods. I could theoretically apply for a job and remain completely anonymous up until the day they decide to hire me. So I think there's some ways around it, but then at that point it doesn't prohibit them from simply firing me once they realize they've hired a black person. It goes on and on. So I'm not. I think there's some ways around it, but yeah, it's like you said, it's a very muddy issue.
Did you have any points to chip in, Dylan? I'm not sure if...
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. I'm just going to have a quick look at the other things that the Magic Sandwich Show discussed.
I was thinking, rethink.
Go on, keep.
Sorry, I thought I was just going to say something while you're in the middle of that. I was just thinking about that town you were describing, Rethink, where your parents live, and I thought while you were telling the story, I thought if they were allowed to exercise a right to say not serve black people throughout the entire town, I think it would become a town full of white supremacists. I think the white supremacists would all live there. Yeah,
I'm sure.
It would be a very nice place to live.
Yeah, exactly. That's the kind of the backfiring of the free market, is that we would assume all the reasonable people would be like, oh, what a shithole town, but then all the assholes would just flock there, and they might thrive based on that contingent of the population alone, and that would be kind of unfortunate. So. Yeah,
that's the thing. It would definitely become a closed community. No one would want to go there apart from the hardcore racists. I'm not saying that's a reason to let them exercise that. I'm just saying it's an interesting thought experiment to think what might happen.
Yeah, I've heard this thought experiment in a similar conversation with Stefan Molyneux, who I don't agree with on many things, but it has, at least, if nothing else, interesting thought experiments. And his argument was that a free, completely anarchic society could thrive off of sort of a rating system, something akin to like Amazon star rating or eBay seller rating, and that your reputation would be tarnished by doing that. And you don't necessarily need to use force to coerce people into behaving properly. That they would just be incentivized to do so through their own self-motivations of just wanting to remain in good standing with the community.
I think he's wrong about this. I mean, like I say, I sympathise with some libertarian ideals, like having a smaller government, but I think full-on anarchism is naive, to be very generous, and ridiculous and stupid, to be probably more accurate. What in an anarchist society, what would inevitably happen is the issue is that anarchy is just not, it's not stable. It's sort of like this meta-stable state, where for like a couple of years it might possibly work, but what would inevitably happen is you'd get the power concentrated in a small group of individuals, which is what basically happens in any system. You get the power concentrated in a small number of individuals. I mean, that's unescapable. But these individuals are not going to be elected, and what that means is that just through random chance you're going to get someone that's going to behave in a tyrannical way. So the problem is, anarchy is being this sort of metastable state. What eventually happens is anarchy descends into a dictatorship. It's sort of like on the road towards it. So in reality, there's no such thing as an anarchy, as anything else other than a transition between a democracy and a dictatorship.
I want to be clear. I'm not. When I was younger, I found some of the anarcho-capitalist arguments persuasive. As I get older, not so much. But their argument, they call that the power vacuum argument, because I've had a number of conversations with anarcho-capitalists and asked these exact same questions. They call that the power vacuum argument, and that assumes that there's still power to fight over. And you're simply saying that people will achieve power, but their argument is that the power comes from the legitimacy that we grant institutions. It's not because the government outnumbers us, it's because we grant them legitimacy to function. And yeah, we elect them, but their argument is that when there's no position to fight over, that it'll just be some, I don't want to say utopia, but more of a meritocracy, and it'll just be this massive marketplace where people...
So the issue is that it would start off that way, but what would happen is that you would... I mean, this is part of the problem with free market, and I am very much in favour, but the problem is that what you get is that in a true free market, you get the most successful company becomes the biggest company, and then once you're really big, you can choke the competition. And when you choke the competition, there's nothing that... the competition is what fuels the free market, but the issue is the free market creates something that destroys itself. So ironically, you have to have a sort of break on these monopolies from happening, which is, again, it's kind of ironic you have to do this, but you do, otherwise you get the competition being completely choked. I mean, like I say, free market is fueled by competition between small businesses. And in the same way, when you have an anarchist state, you get exactly the same thing happening. You get the most successful company or whatever. Originally, this is a good thing because it's based on meritocracy. But when it gets big enough, it realizes it doesn't have to be competitive anymore because it's so big it can just choke all the competition. In a similar way, in the similar way that Microsoft did. I mean, for example, I don't know. You must have heard of Microsoft Word, the word processing package, Microsoft Word. I don't know. Have you heard of Microsoft?
I think everyone knows about Microsoft Word.
Well, Microsoft Word was actually, back in the day, the worst of all the word processing packages. So there was something called WordStar, and there was something called WordPerfect, and both of those were better than Microsoft Word. But both of them died, and the reason for that was because Microsoft became so huge, it could drop the price on Microsoft Word and undercut these small businesses with their superior products. And it's also the same reason that the VHS tape thrived over what was it?
Beta.
Yeah, Betamax. That's it. Betamax. Yeah. So this is essentially the problem. You have to have a system that stops these monopolies from existing in order to have a true free market, and it kind of seems quite contradictory to have to regulate to stop some, it's kind of contradictory. But the problem with anarchy is exactly the same thing would happen. You would get the biggest the biggest fish, initially the most successful fish, will become the biggest fish, and then it wouldn't need to be competitive anymore. It would just choke all the competition, and then you would.
Yeah, but they have a counter argument for this too. And see, now I'm playing devil's advocate. So their counter argument to the monopoly fear is that the cost of buying out, let's say there's 10 companies competing, or however many, and then one gets exceptionally good and then buys out another one, and now there's only 9, and then they buy out another one, and there's only 8, and it's like, well, the cost of buying out each remaining company becomes higher and higher. And assuming that we're in a free marketplace and there's no force involved, no gun to anybody's head saying, yeah, you will sell out, their argument, not mine, but theirs, is that it becomes prohibitively expensive to buy that last remaining company. And to their credit, I mean, Microsoft didn't. I wouldn't classify Microsoft as a monopoly. Sure, Microsoft had a reputation in the 90s and early 2000s that was well deserved for closely resembling a monopoly, but I would stop short of saying they were a monopoly. They obviously weren't, because we obviously have competition to this day, and I don't think that competition is necessarily because the government allowed Google to come up or something like that. I think just other people got together and made superior products and undercut them. So in that sense, I'm not convinced that a monopoly would always happen. But I do agree that there's nothing necessarily stopping something like a Walmart from, acquiring an army, purely just purchasing it and then just enacting force at will.
I mean, the company does. I mean, from their point of view, that when a company starts out as being quite small, the only way a small company can make it is by being the most successful. The most successful small company wins. But when you're a big company, that you can use underhanded tactics, and you don't. It's not true to say that you have to buy out the smaller companies. You can destroy them in any other ways, and it's in the big company's best interest to destroy the competition, even if they're doing it in a way which is not contingent with being the most successful company. You don't need to be the most successful. If you can destroy the competition, then destroy it. But a small company is incapable of destroying another small company in any other way than simply by being more successful than it. Whereas a large company has lots of other tactics that it can use to completely choke the competition. And I mean, I agree that Microsoft isn't a true monopoly, but the point is that in an anarchist state, something analogous to this would happen. You would get the most powerful, the biggest fish that was initially the most successful. So initially, you'd have a good situation, but it would be metastable, and the guy in charge of the most successful company would basically become the dictator. And anarchy is just a road to a dictatorship.
I tend to agree with that. And the conversation I had with several anarcho-capitalists, they referenced the technology industry when I said, yeah, there needs to be some regulations, and they said one of the least regulated areas is software, and it's not a coincidence. Their argument was that, do you think it's a coincidence that software has been the most rapidly advancing and innovating section, and one of the most best sectors to work in? Do you think that's a coincidence? And I said, well, that's a fair point. I didn't really know how to answer that, and I thought maybe let me think about that and come back. But to their credit, software is largely completely unregulated. Anybody can release software. Anybody can release code, and nothing has really aggregated in the way that we're talking about quite yet.
Well, I mean, it has. I mean, I've given examples of where it has. You've seen the situation where Microsoft has destroyed its superior competition. Like I said, WordPerfect and WordStar were much better products, but they were destroyed by Microsoft. Internet Explorer, it's not any longer, but Internet Explorer used to be the most popular internet web browser. But Netscape Navigator, which was objectively a better browser, was wiped out because of the monopoly. So I mean, it does happen. I mean, not to an entire. I mean, luckily, it's not so bad to the extent where nothing can break through. But it's still quite difficult. If you want to compete with something like Microsoft, you basically lost before you even started. It's very difficult. But I'm not saying I'm arguing for more regulation in the software industry either. I'm just saying that for an analogous reason, the problem with anarchy. How do we get onto this topic?
We were talking about the town where Rethink's parents live.
Yeah, and that is probably the one thing that convinced me the most. That, you know what? Maybe we need some sort of third party with absolute authority on the matter to prevent. I'm absolutely certain that in a place like where my parents, I mean, for them it's not so bad. It's a beautiful town. They're an older couple. They're both black. But when I go there, when I go to the bars, when I'm talking to girls, and these rednecks can't keep up, I'm a city guy. I show up there looking flashy. It's a problem every single time, and I have no doubt that if there wasn't a police force there, ready to, if they didn't know what they were about to do was a hate crime, they would probably do it. If they were in charge of any establishment, they would probably kick me out. No doubt in my mind, and that is unfortunately one of the things that woke me up to say, you know what, maybe we do need some sort of authoritative body providing regulations.
Yeah, I have a feeling that those sorts of people have really petty inferiority complex.
Their motivations are irrelevant. I mean, I know they have inferiority complexes, but their motivations are irrelevant. The fact that they could and would do damage is what scares me.
Do you want to go on to another topic? Because the Magic Sandwich Show covered something else I've got written down here. What do people think about the idea of respect for religion? Do you think religion should be respected?
No. I mean, in terms of their freedom to practice it, sure, but in terms of any other meaningful sense of the word, no. I think they're all ridiculous.
What does it mean to say that it should be respected? Do you mean that we should not have permission to mock it? What does it mean to say that religion should be respected?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what does respect mean in common parlance? It's not a word that I use that often, but what does it mean in common? I don't want to get into
if it was up to them to define it, then yeah, you would be talking about blasphemy, because to them it's sacrosanct, and that would involve not criticizing or definitely ridiculing it. But I think that's one of the great things about our country, is that we ridicule all manner of serious things, even right up to the fact. I mean, you get things like 9/11, comedians were up joking about it weeks, months after. I like that about our country, is that we always poke fun at things like that, and I think ridiculing the ridiculous is crucial. I think we need to keep that. And if it was up to them, though, definitely, I have no doubt. We've seen theocracies; you would not be able to criticize it.
Yeah, I think when you start talking about respecting religion, it kind of, at some point, it's going to boil down to simply recognizing other people's sensitivities. Personally, I have no interest in doing so.
I think the point that Hogtie Champ made was that there's a difference between respect and tolerance. That respect is to be earned, whereas tolerance is something that you have to do as part of a free society. You have to be able to tolerate religion. You don't have to respect it.
And then right up until they deny a gay couple a cake, and then it's like, well, you have to be tolerant of our intolerance, and it's like, well, hold on a minute, like that's not how it works.
That's another matter. That's another matter entirely. So we're talking about what the limit of tolerance is. So I mean, I think respect is a stronger criteria than tolerance. So I think tolerance is something that we generally need to do. Again, part of a free society.
We'd have to define our terms and say what exactly respect entails.
But I think it is possible to tolerate intolerance to a certain degree. I mean, arguably we do that enough with these sorts of with this sort of progressive culture, who are pretty intolerant to anyone that doesn't believe what they believe, and that you could argue that that's tolerating intolerance. And I mean, I've had people on this show, for example, that believe things that are diametrically opposed to what I believe, and believe some things that are pretty intolerant, and I've tolerated them enough to invite them on here. So that's tolerating intolerance. And so I don't think it's a contradiction to tolerate intolerance. I don't think this is something that is really. It's not a paradox. It is possible to tolerate intolerance, I think. But I'm not going to respect.
Well, you're essentially saying that you're tolerating someone else's beliefs. You can tolerate the fact that someone holds the belief, for example, that well, let's go back to Rethink's Town. Maybe those people have the belief that black people shouldn't be allowed in the bar. We can tolerate that they have that belief, but we can't tolerate them to exercise that. There's a difference.
I could tolerate people's intolerance towards me.
Exactly. That's kind of what I'm saying. Until they physically enforce it, such as the example which I was just using, that's unacceptable.
I agree. I mean, it's not their intolerance that's the problem. It's their acting on it and preventing me from going and doing what I choose. It's just the force of it. Yeah, it's just initiating force against me, trying to prevent me from going anywhere I want to do, and I'm not initiating force against anybody else. And it's just like, well, that's something beyond intolerance. That's not just their personal opinion. Now they're acting on it, and that's the problem, I think.
Yeah, I think this can be analogous very much to the free market we were discussing earlier. I think a religion will obtain as much respect as it actually works for. I mean, it used to be the case that people would take their hats off as they walked by the church out of respect. In the years gone by, religion has lost a lot of religious institutions have lost a lot of ground in the amount of respect which they garner from people due to their archaic and incompatible moral stances, among other things. And in the free market of religious ideas, I guess, I mean, whose fault is it if people are no longer respectful of these archaic religious beliefs?
And in that regard, it's really quite interesting to see just how much ground they've lost just in my lifetime alone. Just like you said, all their moral stances, all their stances, they were much more firm when I was younger. It was something like gay marriage. It was very firm, and just see how many churches and different denominations are conceding, all right, well, love exists, can exist between two men, and just seeing how divisive that is. Even in a non-denominational church like my parents, they just tend to try and not bring it up. And it really is a shotgun argument. Things like that make it really lose a lot of respect, which is why I think in part, thanks to the internet, a lot of kids are just distancing themselves from it faster than ever.
I think in general, religion is definitely becoming less common in Western societies, which I think is, I guess, partly a product of secularization, but not necessarily, because of course the UK is I guess in name it's a Christian country, yet it seems to be much more secular than America, which is a secular country. And the separation between religion and state is absolute in America in technicality, but in reality there's a lot of religious influence in American politics, whereas in the UK, again, in technicality, the Anglican Church is what our government answers to, but in reality, it's the other way around, and that's there's basically no religion at all in UK politics. It's just not a subject that comes up ever in UK politics. It would be right down at the bottom. Religion really just doesn't come up. It's not a subject. People don't consider it to be a subject important enough to be worth discussing, whereas in America it's constantly being discussed. It's interesting that a country that was founded in secular beliefs is quite religious, whereas the reverse is true for the UK, and I don't really know why that is. Of course, I guess a similar analogy is that Britain was the first, well, the UK was the first country to have a railway system, and now our railway system is one of the worst in the world. If you're the pioneer, you end up with something pretty bad later, in general.
There's no doubt America is secular on its face, but is extremely religious. I actually work at Harley Davidson. I'm here in Milwaukee, and Wisconsin is a rather progressive state, but the amount, maybe it's just Harley Davidson because of the trad con conservative sort of stereotype dude who might ride it, but where I work, it's extremely religious, and they get dangerously close to. It's uncomfortable. I wouldn't say it's a hostile environment, but I have definitely people on my team who are just extremely religious and constantly evangelizing to me on the job. It comes up on the job a lot. Actually, we just had a teammate randomly pass away. He had muscular, not randomly, he had muscular dystrophy, and we only have a team of like 7 people. So it was hugely heartbreaking to just come in one day and him not be there, and he died on his way to work. And there's a grief counselor coming in, and we were talking about it, and of course everybody in the circle was talking about how we'll see him again, and he's with Jesus now. And I'm just like, you know what? I come from a different perspective where it's much more tragic to me, because I don't have a worldview which allows me to think I'll see this person again, despite what I would want. And they were just their jaws were on the floor. They're like, I can't believe you'd say that. And I got pulled aside afterwards for saying that, and by my boss's boss, who's also my mentor. And I just talked to her. I was like, listen, if you guys can go around the circle and talk about how he's with Jesus now, I have a right to just be like, you know, we're in grief counseling. We said anything goes. This is a safe space, and I said that. And just the amount of backlash I got from just that one statement was just amazing.
So do people evangelize to you because they know that you're atheist? Is that the reason?
Woman in particular on my team who knows I'm an atheist does, without a doubt. And I've actually invited her onto the show several times. She doesn't want to come. Obviously, she's not interested in talking about it. So I asked her to stop. So now what she does is she goes to the cubicle next to mine and evangelizes within earshot of me, basically talking directly to me. The girl that she talks to is married with kids, but she's talking to me. She's talking about how it's a shame that kids don't want to get married, and how it's a shame that they're having sex out of wedlock, and all. She's obviously talking to me, but just not in a direct way. So I just put on my headphones, and she's pretty hostile about it, her in particular. But it comes up way more than it should on the job, and I don't see that happening in any of my friends who are from like Sweden or Germany. They never experience anything even remotely close to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an unwritten law here that, well, I'm in Australia. It's kind of unwritten law in the workplace that, you know, it's just one of those things you don't talk about because of how sensitive people are about their religious beliefs, and because it can. I mean, I work in a team culture. I work for a software company. We're all quite a tight knit group, and you don't want anything to risk disturbing that. The most tensions thing we'd ever talk about is when the elections are on, and that's, you know, there might be a small discussion on people's political views. You know, who are you going to vote for is quite an open question to ask someone. But
it's definitely important.
Never get to the religious subject. No, that's all.
Definitely in poor form to mention religion at work, but it's kind of like what we were saying with the other argument. It's just you get around so many people who think like you, and they have no problem. Again, if it weren't for law separating church and state, or I have no problem. I mean, it's a company, so it's a private marketplace, but I have no problem thinking that were the laws not so in favor of me, that they would institute, you know, prayers every day at work. I have no doubt believing that a conservative company would do that and make it to their own detriment. I think they would pass up on talent like me who would just be like, you know what, it's not worth the hassle to go work there and just deal with that. But it's in poor form. But it's like we said, when you get around so many people who think and feel like you, they feel increasingly emboldened to just bring it up and mention it and shove it down people's throats who don't think the same way they do. And in that regard, it's another argument for some kind of regulation.
Well, basically that's all the topics that they discussed during the Magic Sandwich show. There was also something on dinosaurs again, but I think that's been done quite a lot. So I'm not really sure I'm too interested in having a discussion about creationist stupidity on that front again. But is there anything else people want to talk about?
Some conversations about just how America could have become so religious despite having a sort of free market of religion. And some people have tried to reason that it's because we had a free market of religion that just one sort of competed with all the rest, then just eventually just went out and basically became a monopoly, even though I wouldn't call it a monopoly because there's like 1,000 different denominations that don't agree with each other on pretty much anything the Bible says. But I think that's an interesting topic. It's just how America got to be a secular country, got to be so predominantly religious.
Like, I mean, I think there's an analogy here with the railway system in the UK, where, I mean, this is a physical tangible thing, so it's probably easy to explain. But and the UK was basically the first place in the world, or probably wasn't called UK back then, with Britain, with steam engine trains. We made the railway, and we were the first country to have a railway, and so we were the pioneers. And this meant that when the railways were laid, they were obviously done in the 1800s, when there were steam trains still about. And you can imagine that from today's perspective, they're pretty crude systems. So essentially, what we've got now is we've got an 18th century railway line that back then was cutting edge, best in the world. But today, it's a liability. It's decadent. It's in constant need of repair, and as a consequence, our railways is probably the worst in Europe, if not the Western world. For just to take an example, the tunnels that were originally built are only so big, and while everyone in Europe has double-decker trains, we don't have any double-decker trains at all. So again, our trains are very bad compared to the rest of Europe. They're slower, they're in need of more repair, all these things, as a direct consequence of us being the first people to have trains. And I think something similar happened with America and television sets. So I think you were the first to make televisions. Perhaps I might have this one, but it's the same sort of thing. If you're the first to do it, you end up being the worst because you're stuck with an outdated system. I'm not exactly sure how this can directly be transposed to the untangible system of religion, where America was the first country to sort of enshrine the idea of secularization, and other countries didn't bother doing it. Perhaps there was sort of a resistance to this idea. You know, you've got a constitution that's anti-religious in a sense. So through the decades, you've got people that seem to see a lack of religion, whereas in the UK, despite the fact that we were originally theocratic, and still the Crown still played a considerable role, and it even still does. I mean, we still have an unelected head of state, who is the head of the Anglican Church, but because of the system that we have in the UK, people tend to be lapsed religious, and tend to be so the official religion is still Christianity, but there's no evangelicism in the UK. I mean, at best, you had people going to church once a week, and there's no evangelizing. There's no real creationism either. It's just a sort of national tradition that people are associate with being Christians. And there's also this phenomenon in the UK of people being Christian atheists. So they still call themselves Christian, but in reality they're not really religious at all. I guess you've probably heard more about the sort of atheist Jew, but in the UK there's a lot of sort of atheist Christians. So I guess this sort of thing applies, whereas in America it's very, very different. The culture's very different. There's sort of a lot of heavy religion, despite it coming from a very secular country. Whereas in the UK, religion has always been part of the national tradition, but it's always been something you do on Sundays, and you don't really think about it outside of that. And you're certainly not a creationist. You don't deny evolution or science, which never really happens at all, and it never comes into the politics either. So I don't know. I'm rambling now.
No. I mean that's really interesting actually. But yeah, to your point, it like the railroad system, religion has definitely become very much a liability. I think that's the right word. And you brought up for all the right reasons things like evolution. They try to get into schools. They try to corrupt the education process. It's a huge liability. We're wasting massive amounts. I lived in Texas for a couple of years, in Dallas, and the amount of infiltration into school boards and teach the controversy and just the denial of simple science that everybody else accepts as fact. It's a massive waste of money. I can't even begin to describe how insane it is to have people having conversations with adults about why the Earth isn't a couple thousand years old and why we shouldn't be teaching that to children. That's a huge waste of resources.
Yeah, what was one of the recent ones that was parents against dinosaurs or mothers against dinosaurs or something?
Heard about that. I didn't hear too much about it because none of it's surprising to me anymore. It's insanity. It's really unfortunate. It definitely retards the education process.
Yeah, I mean, this was a really extreme. I mean, I think it was greatly attributed to people just trolling the internet. But yeah, this movement, I can't remember if it was parents against dinosaurs or mothers against dinosaurs, but it was this woman, named Megan Fox, who did a video inside one of the museums about how it's full of lies and it's teaching evolution and everything like that. Anyway, this movement, I'm just going to say it's parents against dinosaurs, they were Bible literalists, but instead of taking the stance like Ken Ham does, that dinosaurs must have lived with man because we know from evidence that dinosaurs existed, they take the stance that actually dinosaurs are a complete lie. Dinosaurs don't fit with our worldview, so they're all made up. They couldn't have existed. So you've got these biblical extremists to an equal level who are actually opposed to each other's views. One saying that dinosaurs never existed, and one saying that no, dinosaurs existed along right beside man.
That's scary stuff. Yeah, I don't know if that's like an internet troll thing, but I know definitely with creationism and like the whole teacher controversy, that is dead serious. There are people who are dead serious about not teaching evolution, especially in Texas.
Yeah, the last I heard, this group which I'm referring to, it was said that it had been infiltrated by trolls, and people were uncertain of the proportion of troll to legitimate people within the community.
Is that Poe's law? Is that Poe's law where like
that's Poe's law of play? That's right.
There you go.
Well, I mean, it is interesting because again, there really isn't anything like that in the UK. I mean, it's remarkable how religion just doesn't come into politics at all, because it's just so low down on the list of controversial issues. I mean, there's a number of controversial issues that always come up in British politics. One being the NHS, one being immigration, one being the economy. They always come up. But religion never does. It never makes the cut because no one cares about it. It's just not a contentious issue. So in the UK, no one would really vote for a political party based on religion.
For a contentious issue? Is it just now that maybe it's just the case that as religion is sort of in its last death throes, I think here, that they're lashing out and desperate, but did the UK go through something similar at some point in history? Was it ever like that?
The UK really wasn't. I mean, it just wasn't. I mean, like I say, in the UK, Christianity was part of this whole national pride thing. I mean, when you think of a British person, they probably would be religious. I mean, going back all the way, let's say back all the way to the Second World War, the average Briton would be religious, and they would go to church and they would celebrate Christmas in a church. They would get well in a church, but that's all they would do. They wouldn't evangelize. They wouldn't speak of religion outside of going to church. They would just go to church, and that would be it. They would never really. Religion would never come up as a topic. They certainly wouldn't go around evangelizing it. Creationism never took off in the UK. There were a couple of small groups, but really, there's no creationism at all to speak of in the UK. It was just one of those sort of traditional, mainstream, non-evangelical Christianity was just a whole national thing. And what seems to have happened in the UK is that it's gradually become even more dilute than it originally was, so that the UK is still a Christian country. And for instance, the sort of the royal family in the UK, a lot of people really are very much pro the royal family. Like, I think 80% of people would want to keep the royal family. It's very popular in the UK. But no one, certainly not 80% of people are religious. I mean, in the UK, probably 40% of people are religious, and even that's probably too much, because a lot of the people that say that they're religious, basically what they mean when they say they're religious is they go to church every Sunday, and that's it. That's all they do. They're not like, they don't evangelize about it. They don't try to convert anyone else to their religion. They don't talk about religion. They just go to church, do their religious celebrations, and really that's it.
You ought to come visit the United States, because, like I said, even in a progressive state, it's it's not completely pervasive, but definitely every time I walk out of the house, I can find within a mile right now somebody evangelizing on the street. We have this guy in the city called my sister calls him the God Squad, and he's been riding around since literally as long as I can remember, in the same old wood-paneled station wagon with covered in God messages, and he just rides around the city just evangelizing. You see him all the time, and just kind of just part of the scenery, just normal to me, but that would probably look like madness to other people. And that's just sort of part of the experience here.
I mean, the American culture is very, very different to the British culture.
And they're in full panic mode. Like I said, I mean, it's even this. There's this massive divide, and it's almost completely generational. Kids, millennials, and younger do not believe in God. They're not as religious, and our parents and our grandparents do, and they're in full panic mode. They constantly. You can go in any church or on any street corner just preaching against things like Tinder, they're just in full panic mode. They think the society is just in complete moral decay. Like, they're just freaking out.
But it's all. I mean, there's. I mean, again, this is still true in the UK. The older you are, the more likely you are to be a Christian. But even the older generations. I mean, like I said, going back all the way to the Second World War, being a Christian just meant that you went to church every Sunday. You engaged in religious ceremonies. You probably went to midnight mass. But
right.
That really is as far as it went. There's never really been any creationism or evangelicism in the UK. It just seems to be that America seems to do these to a much more extreme level. I mean, we don't really see this sort of atheist rebuttal type stuff coming out in the UK either. So I mean, like if you look at atheist YouTube channels, for instance, the vast majority of atheist YouTube channels are probably American. There are the British atheism on YouTube I think is in a minority, which considering how big the internet is in the UK, it is probably. I mean, I know America has a much bigger population, so you probably expect it to a certain degree, but it's people are just. The best word to describe it is that everyone in this country is really apathetic on this sort of thing. That's not to say that people in Britain are generally apathetic, but they are apathetic on the religious side of things. There are just other issues that are far more important in British politics than religion, and issues that constantly come up. And it just seems to be a completely different state of affairs, completely different culture. I mean, one interesting thing is in America, gun control and gun laws come up an awful lot in America. Again, that wouldn't even make the cut in Britain. A party that went on about gun control. I mean, like the most moral conservative parties in the UK. The parties that you would expect to be in favour of gun control don't even mention it in their manifesto on the basis that it's just not worth it, because it's just not a contentious enough issue. So gun control does not come up at all in the UK. It's not an issue. The death penalty doesn't come up at all in the UK. That's not an issue either. The issues in the UK, like I say, the big three are the economy, immigration, and the NHS. They always come up. And But
I thought Europe outlawed the death penalty.
yeah, oh yeah, the EU basically forbids it. But of course, if we leave the EU, then I suppose in theory it could be reinstated. Actually, that's something that's quite big in the UK at the moment. They have the prospect of leaving the European Union. So we're actually going to have a referendum, if not next year, the year after, on whether the UK is going to leave the European Union. So that should be interesting. There's a lot of arguments for and against that.
Yeah, I tend to, just on the subject still of why people in America, well, how America became so religious. I'm sure there are documented historical reasons for it, but I tend to hold the position that people will hold religious beliefs when they believe that they need them. People will hold religious beliefs if they feel that they need to believe they will see their loved ones again after they die, or if they feel that they need to believe that there's someone looking out for them all the time. And I mean, there are obviously more reasons. There are more reasons, people can be indoctrinated into it. People are indoctrinated into religion.
I think it was a lot more simple than that. I think it was believe in God or we'll kill you, basically.
There are ways that you get stuck holding religious beliefs, such as that. So what has happened in America to cause people to need to hold these beliefs? I don't know. There must be some historical context there.
Well, like I say, I mean, maybe there's the railway analogy thing. Maybe that's relevant. There's a correlation between the initial secularization versus the current state of affairs. I mean, another example. It's not anything to do with Christianity, but Turkey is quite interesting as a country because Turkey is basically the only Islamic secular country. Someone correct me on that if I'm wrong, but as far as I'm aware, Turkey is the only secular Islamic country, although arguably it's becoming somewhat more theocratic now. But so Turkey has a population of about 99% Muslims, but it is secular. So I do believe that in Turkey they have freedom of religion, and that you are allowed to be an atheist in Turkey, which is not the case of most Islamic countries. So that it might be interesting to compare the parallels between the secular Islamic country of Turkey and the secular Christian country of America, and see if there's any parallels to be drawn between these two countries. I'm not sure though. It'd be interesting to think about that.
You guys still there? Got very quiet.
Yeah, was there another subject you wanted to move on to?
Yeah, we should probably move on to the next one.
Well, we've discussed everything that the Magic Sandwicher discussed. I've got a list of topics, and I think we've basically discussed everything. So, is there any other main issue that people wanted to have a think about?
Yeah, I wanted to get your feedback on your. I know we've got for anybody who didn't catch the first round between you and True Puka. I think you guys had a really good conversation on gender politics, and I know you've got a second one coming up. I don't know if you wanted to recap your first one, since I was moderator for that. I don't know if you had any thoughts on your first one going into your second one.
Oh, I guess I might as well because Puka's done a video on his channel about the discussion, and I've really done nothing about it since I made that video, since we did the debate. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it was I think most people agreed it was a rather fruitful discussion. The feedback that we got was generally very positive. People seemed to think it was quite a civilized discussion, and they'd like to see more of that sort of thing. I know that in terms of the amount of comments that it got, there were about 1,000 comments left on that video, which is basically more than every other one of my videos combined. So there was a lot of audience engagement. And what we tending to do next time is concentrate on a few areas of gender politics rather than trying to cover the whole thing. People have left comments on that original debate and on Puka's video, and we're going to look at those comments and maybe use them as a springboard to discuss some of the more contentious issues. And maybe that will go quite well. And it will incidentally be on the True Puka's channel this time. I think that's only fair since he's done it on my channel, so I have to do it on his channel next. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that next Saturday at basically this time, I think.
Looking forward to it too. It did seem like a lot of pretty positive comments, so I was happy with it. It's one of those very contentious issues that can very easily devolve into heated disagreement, but thankfully didn't. So.
Well, I guess we could ask, what do people think in general about this sort of progressive feminist type movement? What are some opinions on this?
Well, I go ahead, Kansai.
The sort of reason and logic movement. I think that a lot of moderate Christians, they either don't care or don't know. It's your fundamentalists that are trying to fight back hard. Which fundamentalists are shooting themselves in the foot by acting like asshats.
Yeah, I think Quantum, if your question was about the did you say the feminism movement in particular, or just reason and logic?
I think he was asking about the feminist movement, the current feminist movement.
What do you think, Dylan?
Among. All right.
Oh, I thought it was
delve in a
talking
little
about
bit.
the logic movement.
Was there anything you wanted to say, Katsai?
It was my bad. I thought you were talking about the reason and logic movement.
Yeah. Hopefully we can cover this a bit more in the next episode after Quantum has had his second round of debate with True Puka. But generally speaking,
I've just been a little bit. Sorry, I'll let you finish. I've just been a little bit distracted because I'm trying to get Mordred in. I noticed that he's in the comments, and it'd be quite good to get him in because we haven't had him on here for quite a while. So continue anyway.
Sure, no problem. Generally speaking, I've been opposed. Well, no, I wouldn't. Opposed is a strong word, but dissuaded by the current feminist movement ever since I became aware of it. I guess the way I became aware of it was by its pervasion over the gaming culture, video gaming. And I began to listen to some of their arguments, and I just noticed a lot of illogical ideas coming from that movement. So at this stage, I'm not terribly persuaded. I mean, they have this idea of these ideas of patriarchy and all this kind of thing. I think they have their mind. I think they have their hearts in the right place, but they're not going about it the right way.
I don't know. I see a lot of the top movers that they are sexist against men, and it's a shame because it shouldn't be like that, because feminism wants equality. Feminism movie is about equality, and I see them coming up with ways just to be sexist against men.
For those that are a bit confused, the other quantum overlord isn't me. It's Mordred actually using my account. So I'm not sure. Maybe he's going to log out, or we can maybe have two, and that'll be quite interesting. We'll have to tell from our accents who's who.
What did you think? Mortar, did you get a chance to catch the first half of the debate?